Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, along with some leased territory in China's Xinjiang region, were together known as French Indochina. During the Second World War, Japan occupied it, and after the war ended, the French came back to take control. But by this point, many people in Vietnam wanted independence. And this resulted in the First Indochina War, which lasted from 1946 to 1954. And in this war, the Viet Minh, under the command of Ho Chi Minh, expelled the French from the north of Vietnam. Then in 1954, the Geneva Conference occurred and Vietnam was partitioned into two states. France retained the south under Emperor Bao Dai and the north became an independent state. Now the border was placed at the 17th parallel, but this was only supposed to last till 1956 when elections would occur to unite both countries. In 1955, South Vietnam held a referendum over whether the country should be a monarchy or republic. And because majority voted for republic, the emperor was deposed and Diem took over as the first president. He was supported by the US, and the first thing he did was violate the Geneva Agreement and did not hold the elections. His reason was actually very simple. He knew that Ho Chi Minh would win very easily, but this basically worsened the relations between the two Vietnams and started Vietnam War. Now the US supported Diem because they thought that if Ho Chi Minh won in Vietnam, Vietnam would become communist. And if Vietnam became communist, then the neighboring states might follow. It was a theory known as the domino theory. But the problem was, Diem was both corrupt and detached from the reality. While most people in his country were Buddhist, he was Christian. And still, this didn't stop him from persecuting the non Christians in his country. His regime was also very corrupt and violent for the majority of his population, who were just poor farmers. And all this did was encourage more of them to, support the Viet Cong, the North, and the desire to unite with them. In 1964, the US finally had enough and they secretly supported a coup that killed Diem. But even though Diem was eliminated, the USA's worries did not end here. And that's when the Gulf of Tonkin incident finally occurred and allowed the Congress to pass a resolution of the same name, and US entered the war on South Vietnam's side. But here's the thing, what actually happened in this incident is debated to this day, with many saying it was an inside job, a staged incident only done so that USA's entry in the war could be justified. But either way, US was now at war with North Vietnam, and the Americans used very brutal tactics. They bought chemical weapons like napalm and Agent Orange. These would cause painful burns on body, and Agent Orange, in case you don't know, actually caused one of the greatest ecocides in history. And the reason for this was that Vietnam was mostly a jungle, okay? And the Viet Cong forces were using a strategy called guerrilla warfare. They would hide in the jungles, come out, do some raids, and then go back, hide there once again. And the Americans were like, if there is no jungle to hide, then we can easily win this war. So that's why they did this terrible ecocide. And then they would also do search and destroy missions because they wanted to find Viet Cong fighters and eliminate them. So they would just go to villages, search everything, and kill people who they thought were Viet Cong fighters. And then Operation Rolling Thunder also began. It was basically carpet bombing of Vietnam. But remember when I said Vietnam was mostly jungle? So most bombs either fell on civilians or they just missed their targets and fell in random places in the jungle. And so the Operation Rolling Thunder couldn't really, do much when it came to eliminating the guerrilla forces hiding in jungles. So the inefficiency was clear. And furthermore, as if things weren't bad enough for the Americans, the Viet Cong also maintained a supply line through Cambodia and Laos called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. To stop this trail, the US bombed Laos and Cambodia, but this didn't harm the trail. You know what it actually harmed? The civilians and the US reputation in those countries. Viet Cong were very clever people. They would hide in jungles and they had networks of underground tunnels for hiding and for transportation. You can still find many of these in Vietnam today. And Viet Cong fighters were often, hard to distinguish from civilians. And search and destroy tactics often led to civilians being killed. And the fact that Viet Cong guerrilla forces could be hiding in the jungle anywhere and could come out anytime to attack soon began to take a toll on the morale and psychological well being of the American troops. In 1968, Viet Cong decided to launch an offensive into South Vietnam while the public was busy celebrating the Vietnamese New Year known as Tet. But the offensive failed very badly and they suffered heavy losses. But still, people in the US soon started questioning the war. Like, it has lasted so long, why? And the same year, news leaked of My Lai massacre. In case you don't know, American troops were on a search and destroy mission in a village in South Vietnam. But what they did was they tortured, raped, and killed civilians, and then they just tried to cover up the act. But it became public, and back home, the Americans were very frustrated. And they started asking questions like, why are our troops doing this? And at the same time, media was, constantly showing videos of civilians being tortured, killed, and their houses being burned, chemical weapons, and everything, like the Napalm Girl photo. People were quite angry about it. And many Americans refused to join the conscription, and they were punished for it. And anti war protests also became violent because authorities opened fire and people were killed. But none of this could stop opposition to the war, which began to continue. Some people, were opposed to the war for moral reasons because of all the crimes and atrocities the Americans were doing. Others cited the fact that, the amount of US troops and money being spent on the war was simply not worth it. And then there was a problem of racism. So the conscription, officially known as the war draft, clearly showed that people of African origin were given harsher roles, where the chances of getting killed were actually high compared to people of other ethnic origins. And because of this and other discriminations they faced, many African Americans like Muhammad Ali the boxer, they refused to fight. Muhammad Ali would say, why should I fight for a country that does not give me equal rights at home? Eventually, President Lyndon B. Johnson realized that US couldn't win this war militarily. So he ordered the bombings to stop and talks began over the withdrawal of US forces. And he knew his reputation was finished. So he decided not to take part in the next elections, and in 1968 he was replaced by Richard Nixon. Sorry, 1969 he got replaced by Richard Nixon. Then in 1973 the Paris Peace Accords were signed by all parties and the US left. Just 2 years later, South Vietnam fell and the whole of Vietnam became a communist country. Not only that, but around the same time, Cambodia and Laos also became communists. So, coming to our fundamental question, was communism successfully contained? Absolutely not. Not only did the US have to withdraw from the war, just 2 years later, South Vietnam fell and all of Vietnam became communist. And then, because of the bombings the US had done earlier in Cambodia and Laos, communists also gained popularity in those countries and they also became communist around the same time. So containment wasn't done. In fact, the bombings actually helped spread communism in a way. Thank you for watching.